11 o'clock at night. The 50th floor of the Ashford Grand Casino, Las Vegas. Dominic Ashford sat behind a black oak desk, his cold eyes moving over a contract worth millions of dollars. He was the man this entire city feared. No one stepped into this room without being invited. But tonight, having slipped past the distracted guards during the shift change and following a delivery cart into the private elevator, a little boy walked in. He put on his brave suit again, the worn, ill-fitting clothes that had witnessed his first meeting with the giant. In his arms, he held a brown leather document case almost half his size. He walked straight to the desk. He didn't lower his head. He didn't tremble. He set the case down. "My mother couldn't come tonight, so I came in her place. I've come to ask for a job for my mother." Dominic Ashford, the man who had once made the entire underworld empire of Las Vegas shake, found himself, for the first time in his life, not knowing what to say. Tristan Cole stood by the door, one hand already slipping inside his suit jacket with the reflex of a man who was always ready to respond. Dominic glanced at him and frowned once. That was all. Tristan understood at once, lowered his hand, but never took his eyes off the boy. The room sank into silence. The steady hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. Dim golden light cast shadows across the glass wall that looked out over the glittering sweep of Las Vegas below. Dominic set his pen down, leaned back, and studied the child standing before him. The clothes were old, but clean. Someone had pressed every fold flat, had carefully hemmed the pants even though the fabric had already faded with wear. The sneakers were frayed at the edges, but the laces were tied tight, neat, and proper. And the eyes, amber eyes that looked straight at him, without flinching, without pleading. Dominic had met every kind of person in his life. Powerful men had come here to beg. High rollers had trembled when they stood in front of him. But this little boy wasn't afraid. It wasn't the recklessness of a fool. It was the strange calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. "What is your name?" Dominic's voice was low and unhurried, as though he were speaking to a business partner instead of a 7-year-old child. "Micah Wells." "How old are you?" 7. Dominic tilted his head slightly, his fingers tapping softly against the desk. "And you think a 7-year-old child can walk into a place like this at 11 o'clock at night?" Micah remained still, his arms at his sides, his voice quiet but never shaking. "I think this is the place where my mother could find work, if you're willing to read her file." Dominic didn't answer at once. He looked down at the brown leather case resting on the desk, old, the corners worn, but carefully cleaned. Then he looked back at the boy, 7 years old, alone, in the middle of the night, in the den of the man all of Las Vegas wouldn't dare name. Tristan cast a glance toward his boss, his eyes full of questions. Normally, anyone who entered this room without permission would be removed at once, but Dominic gave no order. He simply sat there, his fingers still tapping in a measured rhythm against the edge of the desk, his steel-gray eyes never leaving the child in front of him. 1 minute passed, then 2. At last, Dominic leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. He didn't tell the boy to leave. He didn't tell him to stay. He only watched, as though he were trying to read something he himself didn't yet understand. Micah remained there, motionless, no pleading, just waiting. If this story has touched your heart, please press like to support us. Share this video with the people you love, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next deeply emotional stories to come. Dominic rose from his chair and walked slowly to the glass wall overlooking the city. Las Vegas stretched beneath him like a glittering carpet of diamonds, millions of lights flickering in the black night. But he knew better than anyone that beneath all that shimmer lay darkness, sin, and lives ground into dust. He had built his empire out of those very shadows. "Do you know who I am?" Dominic asked without turning around, his voice carrying through the silent room. "You are Dominic Ashford," Micah answered, his tone still as calm as if he were reciting an essay in front of his class. "You own this casino, and many other things people don't say out loud." Dominic turned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. He couldn't quite hide his surprise. A 7-year-old child, standing in the room of the most powerful man in Las Vegas, speaking about him as though they were discussing the weather. "You know quite a lot." "Who told you?" "My mother," Micah answered at once. "My mother said you're the most powerful man in this city. She said that if she could work for you, my mother and I would be safe. We wouldn't have to keep running." Dominic stepped in front of the boy and bent down until his eyes were level with the amber eyes looking straight back at him. Only a few inches separated them now, close enough for Dominic to see the faint traces of dust on the collar of the oversized white shirt, close enough to realize that this child wasn't afraid at all. Safe from what? Micah was silent for a second. His eyes blinked quickly, as if he were weighing how much he should say. Then he answered, his voice a little lower. From the people who are looking for my mother. Dominic didn't reply right away. He straightened, turned his back to the boy, and walked once more to the window. One hand slipped into his pocket, his gaze fixed on the city while his mind was somewhere else entirely. "Look down there," he said, his voice slow and measured. "Thousands of people in this city want to work for me. They stand in line. They submit applications. They wait for months. Some of them wait an entire year and still never meet me even once." He turned back and looked at Micah. "I have rules. Everyone follows them. There are no exceptions. There never have been." He paused, and his voice grew heavier. "Your mother isn't here tonight. That means she missed her chance." Micah remained where he was, his two small hands clenched into fists at his sides. He didn't step back. He didn't lower his head. His voice was quiet, but every word came out clear, as though he had practiced them hundreds of times. "My grandmother had a heart attack at 7 o'clock tonight. The ambulance came at 7:30. My mother had to go with her to the hospital." Dominic said nothing. He only stood there and listened. "My mother didn't miss it," Micah continued, his voice catching slightly, though he still tried to hold it steady. "My mother had to choose between this interview and my grandmother lying on a stretcher in the ambulance. And my mother chose my grandmother." Silence. The steady hum of the air conditioner, the distant roar of the city rising from 50 floors below. Dominic looked at the boy, and his eyes were no longer as cold as they had been before. He saw himself from 30 years ago in that gaze, just as stubborn, just as unwilling to bow his head, just as alone against the world. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice a little softer now. "You're here. Who brought you?" "I came by myself." "Alone?" "Alone." Dominic drew in a long, deep breath. "Why?" "Because I didn't want my mother to have to choose," Micah answered, his eyes bright beneath the dim light. "My mother chose my grandmother. I chose to come here. That way my mother doesn't have to lose anything at all." Dominic straightened, his arms folding across his chest. He studied the boy for a long moment, as though trying to read the terms of a complicated contract. Something flickered through his eyes. It wasn't softness, but it was no longer absolute coldness either. "Give me one reason," he said slowly. "One reason I should open your mother's file and read it, instead of calling security to take you home right now." Micah drew in a breath. The 7-year-old boy stood with his back straight, his chin lifted, his eyes fixed on the face of the most powerful man in Las Vegas. "Because my mother deserves to be seen. Just once. One time for you to know who my mother is. Before you decide." The room fell into silence. Tristan stood by the door, holding his breath as he waited. Dominic said nothing. He only stood there, his fingers tapping lightly against the arm folded across his chest, his eyes never leaving the boy in front of him. Dominic walked back to the desk and pulled out his chair before sitting down. He said nothing for a few seconds. He only looked at the boy standing across from him with the strange patience of a child who had already grown used to waiting. "Tell me about your mother." Micah tilted his head slightly, as though he were weighing where to begin. His hand still rested on the brown leather document case, his small fingers holding on tightly as if it were the most precious thing he owned. "My mother's name is Janessa. Janessa Wells," he began, his voice gentle but clear. "She used to work as an accountant for a large company in Salt Lake City. She's very good. She knows how to find the numbers other people try to hide." Dominic listened without interrupting. "Then my father left," Micah continued, his voice never shaking, though something in it had gone lower and heavier. "My father left behind debts, mounting debts. The people who loaned him money came looking for my mother. They weren't good people. My mother and I had to run." The little boy went on. 3 cities in 2 years. Salt Lake City, Phoenix, then here. My mother did every kind of job, waiting tables in diners, cleaning hotel rooms, making deliveries at night after I was already asleep. Dominic remained silent. He had heard hundreds of tragic stories in his life, but hearing one from the mouth of a 7-year-old child, spoken in a calm voice as if he were telling a fairy tale, was something altogether different. "My mother never complains," Micah said, and his eyes brightened. No matter how tired she is, she still smiles at me. She says, "Everything is going to be all right, Micah. I promise you." And I believe her, because my mother has never broken her word. Dominic tapped his fingers lightly on the desk. "The interview tonight. How did your mother prepare for it?" Micah drew in a deep breath. "She's been preparing for 2 weeks. She borrowed an iron from the neighbor to press her old suit, the only suit she still had left from when she worked in an office." He paused for a second, as if he were seeing something again in his mind. "Every night, when she thought I was asleep, she stood in front of the mirror practicing her answers for the interview. I saw her through the crack in the door. She said the same answers over and over, changing every sentence, every word. Sometimes she cried, but the next morning, she still smiled at me as if nothing had happened." Dominic said nothing. He only looked at the boy, his eyes no longer carrying the sharp coldness they had at the beginning. "My mother said to me, 'This is our only chance, Micah. If I get this job, we won't have to run anymore. You'll get to go to school the right way. Your grandmother will be able to get treatment.'" Micah swallowed. She said tonight was going to change everything. The little boy pushed the document case toward Dominic. As it slid across the black oak desk, something fell out. Small, catching the light. A soft metallic sound touched the wood. Micah bent down and picked it up. It was a silver bracelet, old now, its color dulled by time. On its surface was a single word, faintly engraved. "My grandmother's," Micah explained. "My mother brought it with her for good luck. My grandmother says this bracelet is very special. It once saved someone's life." Dominic reached out, intending to take the case. But his hand stopped in midair. His eyes locked on the silver bracelet in the boy's hand. Tristan, standing by the door, noticed at once that something was wrong. In 10 years of working beside Dominic Ashford, he had never seen his employer wear an expression like this. His eyes wider than before, his breathing heavier, as if he had just seen a ghost rising out of the past. "Let me see that bracelet." Dominic's voice dropped, nearly to a whisper. Micah hesitated for a second, then placed the bracelet in his palm. Dominic lifted it and turned it gently beneath the light. The faded word hope came into view. His fingers moved over each worn letter as though he were touching something sacred that had been lost a very long time ago. And then the memory came crashing back. 18 years earlier. A pitch-dark alley in the slums of southern Las Vegas. A 15-year-old boy running through the night, one hand pressed hard against the stab wound in his side, blood slipping through his fingers. He was running from his own father, the man who had just driven a knife into him because he had dared to hide money to buy medicine for his mother, instead of handing it over to be gambled away. He collapsed in front of an old wooden door. He had no strength left to run another step. He thought he was going to die there. But the door opened. A middle-aged woman looked down at him. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't ask what had happened. She simply pulled him inside, laid him on an old sofa, and bandaged the wound. When he woke, she was sitting beside him, holding out a silver bracelet. "Everyone deserves hope, young man. Even you. Never forget that." That was the last night Dominic was still a child, and it was the first time in his life anyone had shown him kindness without asking for anything in return. He left that house at dawn, carrying the bracelet and the promise that he would return one day and repay the debt. But when he came back a few months later, someone else was living in the house. That woman had vanished as though she had never existed. She had changed her name to avoid her son-in-law's creditors, living as a ghost until her illness forced her to use her real identity for hospital records. Dominic lifted his head and looked at Micah with entirely different eyes. His voice dropped lower, almost trembling. "Your grandmother, what is her full name?" "Helena Wells." Dominic stopped breathing. His fingers tightened around the silver bracelet. Helena, the name he had searched for over the last 18 years. The woman who had saved his life on the darkest, most hopeless night he had ever known. Slowly, he set the bracelet down on the desk, right beside the brown leather document case. Then he pulled the case toward himself and opened it. For the first time that night, Dominic Ashford began to read Janessa Wells's file. Dominic turned each page of the file in silence. The dim golden light fell across the neatly typed lines, across the numbers arranged in careful order. Micah stood opposite him without moving, his hands hanging at his sides like a sentry waiting for orders. Janessa Wells, 27 years old, former forensic accountant at Morrison & Webb, one of the largest auditing firms in the United States. certified public accountant, specialized in detecting financial fraud, had handled complex cases worth millions of dollars. Dominic turned another page. Left her job 2 years earlier for personal reasons. No formal employment since then. Only temporary work. Waiting tables, cleaning hotel rooms, making deliveries. He looked down at the recommendation letters. One from the pastor of a local church, praising her diligence and honesty. Another from the owner of the laundromat where she worked part-time, calling her the most reliable employee she had ever had. Dominic understood at once the story hiding behind these dry lines. A husband with a gambling habit. Debts piled on top of debts. She took her son and ran. Gave up a rising career. Gave up everything to keep her boy safe. A life shattered, and yet she still struggled every day to stand back up. He had seen too many people like that. People battered by life, crushed beneath circumstance. Most of them fell and never rose again. But every now and then, there were people like Janessa Wells. People who refused to give up. Dominic closed the file and set it down on the desk. Then he lifted his eyes to Micah. "Your mother will have 1 week." Micah blinked, as though he couldn't believe what he had just heard. 1 week, sir? 7 days, Dominic said, his voice still even, but final. 1 week to prove that what is written in this file is true. I will put your mother in charge of the books for Ashford Hospitality Group, my restaurant chain. Entirely legitimate. Nothing questionable. Micah swallowed. And if my mother does well, then your mother stays. There will be a formal salary, health insurance, safe housing. Dominic looked directly into the boy's eyes. And if she can't do it, your mother will have to leave. I don't give second chances. I never have. Make sure your mother understands that clearly. Micah didn't answer right away. He stood still for a moment, as though he were trying to take in everything he had just heard. Then he bowed deeply. A bow far too formal, far too old for a 7-year-old child, as if he had already seen and lived through more than his age should ever have allowed. Thank you, sir. My mother won't disappoint you. I promise. Dominic didn't reply. He only gave a single nod, then turned to Tristan, who was still standing by the door. Take the boy home safely. Micah turned and began walking toward the door. But after only a few steps, Dominic's voice sounded behind him. Wait! The boy stopped and turned his head. Dominic picked up the silver bracelet, its dulled metal catching the light beneath the lamp. He looked at it for a long time, his fingers passing over the faded word hope. Then he held it out toward Micah. Give this back to your grandmother, and tell her one thing. Micah came closer and received the bracelet with both hands. Dominic paused for a second. His voice softened, almost to a whisper. Tell her that someone still owes her a life, and that person never forgot. Micah looked at him, his young face filled with questions. He wanted to ask. He wanted to know the meaning behind those words, but there was something in the gray eyes of the man before him that made him stay silent. He only nodded, slipped the bracelet into his shirt pocket, and followed Tristan out. The door closed. Tristan glanced back at his employer one last time before taking the boy away. In 10 years of working for Dominic Ashford, he had never seen the man wear an expression like that. It wasn't softness, but it was something close to remembrance, something close to pain. Dominic walked to the glass wall and looked down at the glittering city of Las Vegas below. His hand slipped into his trouser pocket. Yet he could still feel the warmth lingering on the fingers that had held the bracelet. 18 years. He had searched for that woman for 18 years, hired investigators, turned over old records, returned to that slum dozens of times. He had never found her, and tonight, her grandson had stepped into his life. A 7-year-old child carrying an oversized document case. A boy who had dared to stand before the most powerful Mafia boss in Las Vegas to ask for a job for his mother. Dominic gave a faint laugh, one of those rare and fleeting smiles. Fate, sometimes, truly did have a sense of humor. He turned back to the desk and looked at the file still lying there. Janessa Wells, the daughter of Helena Wells, the mother who had given him hope when he had nothing left at all. Now it was his turn to give her daughter a chance. The next morning, St. Mary Hospital. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtain, casting pale streaks of light across the cold white tile floor. Janessa sat beside her mother's bed, her hand clasping the older woman's frail fingers, her eyes dark with the shadows of a sleepless night. Helena lay still in the hospital bed, the heart monitor giving off its steady beep-beep, the oxygen tube still resting beneath her nose. The doctor had said she was out of immediate danger, but she needed heart surgery. The cost was a number Janessa hardly dared let herself think about. $200,000. Possibly more. Even a lifetime of work might not be enough to cover it. She looked down at her mother, tears threatening to rise, but she forced them back. She couldn't cry. Not now. The phone in her pocket began to vibrate. An unfamiliar number. Janessa hesitated for a second, then answered. "Miss Wells?" The man's voice was low, polite, but not warm. "I'm calling from Mr. Ashford's office. Mr. Ashford would like to see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon. The address will be sent to you by text message." Janessa shot to her feet so suddenly she nearly dropped the phone. "Ashford? I don't understand. I missed the interview last night. Mr. Ashford is aware of that." The voice on the other end remained even. "But he still wants to meet with you. 2 o'clock this afternoon. Don't be late." The call ended. Janessa stood frozen, staring at the darkened phone screen. Ashford wanted to see her? After she had missed the interview? It made no sense. Unless... She turned toward the corner of the hospital room. Micah was sitting in a plastic chair, a book in his hand, though his eyes weren't on the page at all. He looked calm, in a way that felt almost suspicious. "Micah." "Yes, Mom. Do you know anything about this?" Micah looked up, his eyes blinking. "Know anything about what?" Janessa narrowed her eyes and stepped in front of her son. She knew that expression well. It was the expression Micah wore whenever he was hiding something. "Micah Wells. Look at me." The boy lowered his head, his fingers worrying the corner of his book. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then his voice came, small as a whisper. "I went to see him last night. I gave him your file." Janessa went still. A ringing filled her ears, as though someone had struck her hard across the head. "You did what?" Micah still didn't look up. "I went to Mr. Ashford's casino. I met him. I gave him your file. By yourself? At 11 o'clock at night? To go see." Janessa couldn't finish the sentence. She knew who Dominic Ashford was. All of Las Vegas knew. He was the man no one dared name out loud. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" Her voice shook with anger and fear. "You could have been. Could have been." She couldn't go on. The thought of what might have happened to her son closed her throat. But Micah lifted his head and looked straight into his mother's eyes. His eyes held no fear, no regret, only a kind of determination no 7-year-old child should ever have had to carry. "You said this was our only chance. I didn't want you to lose it because Grandma got sick. I didn't want you to have to choose." Janessa looked at her son, and without even realizing it, tears were already running down her face. She dropped to her knees and pulled Micah tightly into her arms, feeling the warmth of his small body against her. She said nothing. She didn't know what she could say. She only held him and cried. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Janessa stood before the gates of the Ashford Grand Casino. She wore the old suit she had pressed 2 weeks earlier, her hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her back straight even though her heart was beating wildly inside her chest. She drew in one deep breath, then stepped inside. The elevator carried her to the 50th floor. The doors opened, and she stepped into the vast penthouse. Dominic Ashford stood by the glass wall, his back turned, looking out over the city below. He turned when he heard her footsteps. His eyes swept over her from head to toe, as though he were evaluating a contract. "Do you know who I am?" Janessa didn't avoid that gaze. "I do." "And you still came?" "You asked me here, and I need the job." She spoke plainly, her voice not trembling in the least. "I don't care who you are out there in the world. I only need to know one thing. Is the work you're offering legal?" Dominic looked slightly surprised. He had met many people who came asking him for work, but no one had ever dared lay down a condition to him before. "Aren't you afraid?" Janessa gave a faint smile, tired, but not weak. "I've already been afraid enough, Mr. Ashford. 2 years of running taught me one thing. Fear doesn't help. No one comes to save you just because you're afraid. Only action changes anything." Dominic fell silent and looked at her for a long time. In her eyes, he saw something he rarely found in the people who came before him. Resilience. Not recklessness, not arrogance, but the strength of someone who had touched the bottom and refused to stay there. "1 week, he said, "managing the books for Ashford Hospitality Group. My restaurant chain. Entirely legitimate. And after 1 week, if you can do it, you stay. If you can't, you leave. Dominic looked straight into her eyes. There is no second time. There are no exceptions. Janessa nodded. I understand. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. She bowed her head in thanks, then turned and walked toward the door. But just as her hand touched the doorknob, Dominic's voice came from behind her. Miss Wells. She stopped, but didn't turn around. You have a brave son, braver than many grown men I've met. Janessa stood still for a second. Then she answered, her voice soft, but steady. I know. He's the only reason I'm still standing today. She opened the door and walked out without looking back. For the first 3 days, Janessa worked in silence. The finance office of Ashford Hospitality Group was on the 30th floor, 20 floors below Dominic's penthouse. But the real distance between them was far greater than that. She sat in the corner of the room, at the smallest desk, with the oldest computer. No one greeted her in the morning. No one asked whether she needed help. No one even bothered to look at her when she walked in. She learned everything on her own from the beginning. The accounting system, the management software, the filing structure. She had to dig through stacks of old paperwork to find her own login password because no one cared enough to give it to her. She didn't complain. She simply worked. The other employees glanced at her with suspicion every time she passed by. The invasive looks of people trying to guess what kind of connection she must have had with the boss to be brought in there. She heard the whispering behind her when she went to get water. She must have something going on with the big boss. Otherwise, how did she get in? Let's see how long she lasts. New girl acting like she's above everyone. Heard she's got a kid, probably looking for a sugar daddy. Janessa pretended not to hear. She went back to her desk, turned on her computer, and kept working. Numbers were the only language she needed. Numbers didn't whisper. Numbers didn't judge. Numbers only told the truth. On the second day, while reviewing the previous month's report, she found a small error. One transaction had been entered incorrectly, a $5,000 discrepancy between two financial statements. Not large, but enough to cause trouble in an audit. She corrected it without saying anything to anyone, then sent a brief email to the head of accounting with the subject line, Correction to October report error. No long explanation, no attempt to claim credit. She simply finished the job. On the third day, she completed all the work she had been assigned for the entire week, 4 days ahead of schedule. That evening, Janessa was still in the office when the clock struck 9. The hallway was deserted, with nothing but the soft hum of the air conditioner and the green exit light blinking at the far end of the corridor. She was studying the financial structure of the entire restaurant chain, drawing a diagram on paper, making notes of the points she didn't yet understand. She packed up her things, shut down her computer, and walked to the elevator. The doors opened. Dominic Ashford was standing inside. Janessa stopped for a second, then stepped in. The doors closed. The elevator began to descend. Silence. Still here at 9 o'clock at night? Dominic's voice broke the silence, low and even. Janessa looked straight ahead and didn't turn toward him. The work wasn't finished. The workload I gave you isn't heavy enough to keep you here this late. I'm not only doing what you gave me, she answered calmly. I'm learning the entire system, how it works, how the departments connect to each other. Dominic was silent for a second. What for? To understand, Janessa said. I don't do half-hearted work, Mr. Ashford. If I'm here, I want to know what I'm doing. Not just type numbers into a spreadsheet and go home. Dominic didn't reply. He looked at her with an unreadable expression, as though he were weighing something in his mind. The elevator stopped at the ground floor. The doors were about to open. Your son? Dominic said suddenly. Is he all right? Janessa was slightly surprised. She hadn't expected him to ask about Micah. He's with the woman next door. She's kind. Micah's used to it. Used to his mother working late? Janessa turned to look at him for the first time since stepping into the elevator. Used to taking care of himself. Her voice held no bitterness, no accusation. It was simply the truth. For the past 2 years, he's gotten used to everything. Used to packing up and moving. Used to having no friends. Used to his mother coming home late. He's only 7 years old, but he's grown up more than many adults ever do. The elevator doors opened. Janessa stepped out without looking back. Her figure faded behind the glass doors of the grand lobby and disappeared into the Las Vegas night. Dominic remained in the elevator, watching after her until the doors closed again. Tristan stood beside him, silent as always. He asked nothing. He simply waited. Keep an eye on her? Tristan nodded. Keep an eye on her to control her? No, Dominic answered, his voice lowering. To protect her. She said there are people looking for her. Her former husband's creditors? Maybe. Or worse. Dominic turned the ring on his little finger, the habit he had whenever he was thinking. Find out who they are, how many there are, and where they are now, and if they come here? Dominic looked toward the glass, the lights of Las Vegas glittering in the reflection of his eyes. They won't find her. No one lays a hand on someone under my protection without paying for it. By the 5th day, Janessa understood the entire system. She understood how money flowed in and out of the restaurant chain. She understood how the branches reported their revenue. She understood how the accounting software connected to the banks. And because she understood it too well, she began to see something strange. At first, it was only small figures, scattered and easy to miss. $500 at the Henderson branch, $800 at the Summerlin branch, $1,200 at the downtown branch. Small sums, spread out, easily overlooked in the monthly flow of millions moving through an empire like Ashford Hospitality Group. But Janessa wasn't the kind of person who overlooked anything. She opened a new spreadsheet and began entering each suspicious transaction. By Thursday morning, she had 12 lines. By noon, the number had risen to 37. By afternoon, she had to create a second spreadsheet. She drew a diagram on paper, connecting the points. Every one of those transactions had passed through the same intermediary account, an account given the vague name, Operating Reserve Fund. And that account had been created by someone with high-level access, far above the rank of ordinary accounting staff. Janessa sat back and stared at the total glowing on the screen. $2,300,000 in 6 months. Enough money to buy a large house on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Enough money to change anyone's life. This wasn't a system error. It wasn't an accounting mistake. This was theft with a pattern. Someone was siphoning money from Dominic Ashford right under his nose. Little by little, day after day, like termites hollowing out the pillars of a house from the inside. She closed her laptop and looked out the window. The Las Vegas sky was turning the red-orange of dusk. She had 2 choices. 1, stay silent. Finish her trial week. Take the salary, move on, pretend she had seen nothing. 2, tell the truth, and step into a game whose rules she didn't know. Janessa thought of Micah. Thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed waiting for surgery. Thought of 2 years on the run, of sleepless nights, of meals made of nothing but instant noodles. She couldn't take a reckless risk. She couldn't let everything collapse because of one wrong move. But if she stayed silent, she became an accomplice. And if Dominic discovered the theft later, who would be the first person under suspicion? The new woman, the one no one knew, the one the boss had brought in through the back door. She would be the perfect scapegoat. Janessa stood up and picked up the stack of documents she had just printed. She had no choice left except to tell the truth, and she needed to tell the right person, Tristan Cole. She found him on the 45th floor, in the small office just beside Dominic's penthouse. He was sitting behind his desk, reading something on a screen. When she knocked, he looked up, his sharp eyes sweeping over her the way a scanner reads a code. Miss Wells, what is it? Janessa walked in and set the stack of papers on the desk in front of him. Someone is stealing money from Mr. Ashford. Tristan didn't move. His face stayed as calm as if she had just commented on the weather. He pulled the file toward himself and turned the pages one by one. Silence. Nothing but the soft rustle of paper and the low hum of the air conditioner. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. At last, Tristan looked up. Do you know what this means? I do. You understand that the person doing this isn't an ordinary employee? He spoke slowly, emphasizing each word. This account was created by someone with high-level access. Very high. This is someone the boss trusts. Janessa nodded. I know. That's exactly why I came here. Tristan studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable, his gaze sharp as a blade. You've just stepped into a very dangerous game, Miss Wells. Do you understand that? I do, Janessa answered, and her voice didn't shake. But I don't have a choice. If I stay silent and this comes to light later, I'll be the first one blamed. I'm new here. No one knows who I am. I am the perfect scapegoat. Tristan gave the slightest nod, as if he were acknowledging the logic of her answer. You're smarter than I thought. I'm not smart. Janessa said. "I'm only trying to survive, just like every day for the last 2 years." Tristan rose to his feet, taking the file with him. He walked to the door, then stopped and turned back to look at her. "I'll give this to the boss. Right now. You don't speak to anyone else about this. Not coworkers. Not friends. No one. I understand. And Miss Wells." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "From now until this is resolved, watch every step you take. A thief inside the house is always more dangerous than a thief out on the street. They know every corner, and they won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens them." Janessa swallowed. "What do you think they'll do?" Tristan didn't answer. He only looked at her with an expression that said everything, then walked out. The door closed. Janessa stood alone in the empty room, her heart pounding wildly inside her chest. She had just exposed a traitor inside Dominic Ashford's empire, and now she had no idea whether she had saved her own life or signed her own death warrant. That night, on the 45th floor, in Raymond Cross's office, the glow of the computer screen fell across Raymond's face, casting streaks of light and shadow over the skin of a 42-year-old man that had already begun to sag with age and strain. He sat behind his desk, his tie loosened, a half-empty glass of whiskey resting beside the keyboard. Chief Financial Officer of Ashford Group. 10 years of service, 10 years of absolute trust, and those 10 years were about to come to an end. Raymond stared at the screen, where the warning system was flashing. Someone had accessed old transaction files. Someone had opened folders no one had bothered to look at in the past 6 months. Someone had started fitting together the pieces he had believed were buried too deeply to ever be found. Janessa Wells. Raymond typed her name into the system and pulled up her access history. On the second day, she opened the October report. On the third day, she downloaded the entire ledger for the previous 6 months. On the fourth day, she accessed the account labeled Operating Reserve Fund. And on the fifth day, today, she had opened that file more than 30 times. She had found it. Raymond threw back the rest of his whiskey, feeling the burn slide down his throat. He didn't panic. It was too late for panic. Instead, he began to think. It had all begun 3 years earlier. One unlucky night at Victor Morano's casino, the largest rival to Dominic Ashford. Raymond had lost badly, more than he could ever repay. And Morano wasn't the sort of man who allowed debtors to walk away unpaid. They had given him a choice: repay the debt in money, or repay it in information. Raymond chose the second option. Move money slowly, little by little, through small transactions no one would notice, enough to repay Morano, enough to stay alive. But then greed had grown. If he could move money to Morano, why not keep a little for himself? $2,300,000 in 6 months. More than half of it now sat in his private account in Switzerland. And now, a new employee who hadn't even been there a full week had uncovered everything. Raymond opened a new window on the screen. He had prepared for this possibility long ago. Plan B, the plan he had hoped he would never have to use. He began altering the records, one line at a time, one number at a time. The account labeled Operating Reserve Fund had now been created by Janessa Wells. The suspicious transactions were now approved by Janessa Wells. The electronic signatures, the confirmation emails, everything led back to one name, Janessa Wells. Raymond worked quickly, but carefully. 10 years in finance had taught him how to erase a trail. 10 years working for Dominic Ashford had taught him how to leave no weakness behind. He gave a cold, thin smile as he looked at the finished screen. A new woman who had only just arrived, whose background no one knew, brought in through the back door by the boss himself. Who would believe her? Who would defend her? Perfect. Perfect to take the blame. At the same time, a few miles away, Janessa stepped into the tiny motel room where she and Micah were staying for the time being. She was exhausted to the bone. A long day, a long week, a life that had felt unbearably long. But when she saw Micah curled up on the worn old sofa, a thin blanket pulled over him, his face innocent in sleep, all that exhaustion melted away. Janessa walked over and turned off the television, which was still playing some late-night program. She pulled the blanket higher and tucked it around her son's shoulders. In his sleep, Micah moved his lips, murmuring something she couldn't make out, then drifted deeper into rest. She sat down beside the sofa and looked at him. 7 years old, still believing in good things, still believing that his mother could do anything. "It will be all right, Micah," she whispered, her voice soft as breath. I promise you. This time will be different. She didn't know that on the 45th floor of the Ashford Grand Casino, a man had just pressed send on an email. Raymond watched the words sent appear on the screen. The message went straight to Dominic Ashford's inbox. The subject line stood out in bold. Urgent. Internal embezzlement discovered. Attached was all the evidence he had just fabricated. He shut down the computer, rose from his chair, and walked to the window. Las Vegas glittered below like a sea of diamonds, a city of dreams and of nightmares. Raymond slipped his hands into his trouser pockets and stared out into the dark. "I'm sorry, Miss Wells," he said to the empty room. "But in this game, there can only be one winner, and it won't be you." He took out his phone and called a familiar number. Morano needed to know that everything had been handled, and Raymond needed to know that he himself was still safe. In the cheap motel room, Janessa still sat beside her son, unaware that the storm was already moving toward her. The next morning, Janessa arrived at the office as usual. She stepped out of the elevator on the 30th floor, her document case tucked against her side, ready for a new day of work. But something was different. She felt it the moment she entered the office. Everyone was looking at her. Quick glances that turned away just as fast. Conversations that stopped the instant she passed. No one greeted her. No one even pretended to smile. They avoided her as though she were carrying some contagious plague. Janessa felt a chill crawl down her spine, but she still walked to her desk. She had barely set down her handbag and turned on her computer when two dark figures appeared beside her. Two men in black suits, broad-shouldered, expressionless. Dominic's security men. "Miss Wells," one of them said, his voice empty of feeling. "Come with us." Janessa wanted to ask why, but one look into their cold eyes told her there was no point. She rose and followed them into the elevator. Her co-workers watched her go, whispering among themselves. Not one of them said a word to her. The elevator stopped on the 50th floor. The doors opened. Dominic Ashford's penthouse. Janessa stepped inside, and her heart seemed to drop straight into the pit of her stomach. Dominic sat behind his desk, his face cold as ice, his eyes fixed on her without blinking, without a trace of the warmth she had once glimpsed in him during that elevator ride. Tristan stood by the door, his arms folded across his chest, his face unreadable. And seated across from Dominic was Raymond Cross, the chief financial officer, the man she had never once spoken to directly. No one in that room was looking at her like a colleague. They were looking at her like a criminal. Raymond rose and walked to the large screen mounted on the wall. He pressed a button on the remote, and the first slide appeared. "Mr. Ashford, this is what I found after receiving the alert from the system." He began his presentation. One slide after another, one figure after another. The suspicious transactions over the last 6 months. $2,300,000 moved out of the company, and every last piece of it, every single trail, led to one name, Janessa Wells. Janessa stared at the screen, unable to believe what she was seeing. The account was in her name. The electronic signature matched her sample. The approval emails had been sent from her address. Everything pointed to her. $2,300,000. "Mr. Ashford," Raymond said, his voice heavy with false gravity. "She moved it out in only 2 weeks after joining the company. A plan prepared in advance, I would assume." He turned toward Janessa, his face arranged into counterfeit pain. "I didn't want to believe it, Miss Wells. I truly didn't, but the evidence here is simply too clear." "This is a lie." Janessa stepped forward, and her voice rang through the silent room. "This is a complete lie. I'm the one who found those transactions. I reported them to Mr. Cole yesterday afternoon." Raymond shook his head and sighed as though he regretted having to say what came next. "Of course, that's what you'd say. The best way to hide a crime is to pretend you're the one who discovered it. Throw everyone off the trail." Janessa turned to Tristan, desperation flooding her eyes. "Mr. Cole, you know that's true. I gave you the documents. You read them right in front of me." Tristan looked at her. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He only remained silent. Raymond cut in. "Miss Wells, don't drag other people into this. Mr. Cole rechecked all the documents you gave him. They don't match the system. You created them to distract us once you realized you'd been discovered." "That's not true. I didn't." Janessa turned to Dominic, looking straight into the gray eyes that were observing her with brutal coldness. "Mr. Ashford, please, you have to believe me. I didn't do this. I had no reason to do this." Silence. Dominic said nothing. He looked at her for a long time, and not a single flicker passed through his eyes. No anger, no disappointment. Only cold. Cold as the desert night. Lock her up until the investigation is complete. His voice held only those words, but those words fell like a death sentence. Mr. Ashford. Janessa stepped forward, but the two guards were already blocking her. I didn't do this. Please, let me explain. Strong hands closed around her arms and pulled her back. I'm not a thief, Janessa cried out, her voice breaking. You have to believe me. My son only has me. You can't. The penthouse door slammed shut, cutting off the rest of her cry. Silence. Raymond stood in the middle of the room, trying to keep his face calm, though his shoulders slackened slightly with relief, as though a weight had finally fallen away. He had won, at least for now. Dominic still sat motionless, both hands resting on the desk, his fingers gripping the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. He didn't look at Raymond. He didn't look at Tristan. He only stared into the empty space in front of him. Tristan watched his employer. 10 years beside Dominic Ashford had taught him how to read the man, and what he saw now was strange. Dominic wasn't angry at being betrayed. He hadn't ordered immediate punishment the way he usually would have. He was thinking. And when Dominic Ashford was thinking, it meant he didn't fully believe what he had just been shown. Raymond left the room after offering a few hollow words of thanks. The door closed behind him. Tristan stepped up to the desk. Boss? Dominic kept staring ahead. She said she reported it to you. That's true. Yesterday afternoon. And you brought the documents to me? Not yet. Cross's email arrived first. Silence. Dominic tapped his fingers on the desk. Look into everything again. From the beginning. And don't let Cross know. Tristan nodded, turned, and walked out. Somewhere in this building, Janessa Wells was being held, and somewhere else, the truth was waiting to be found. The basement of the casino, a room without a number. Janessa sat on the narrow bed, her back resting against the cold concrete wall. There was no window, only a single ceiling bulb casting a dull yellow light. A small table, a chair, and an absolute silence, so heavy it felt suffocating. She had no idea how long she had been here. A few hours? Half a day? There was no clock, no phone, nothing except four walls and the thoughts spinning endlessly in her head. For the first time in 2 years, Janessa cried. Tears rolled down her cheeks and fell onto her hands. She wasn't crying out of fear. She wasn't crying out of anger. She was crying for Micah. Where was her son now? What was he thinking? Was he waiting for his mother to come home? The kind neighbor couldn't keep him forever, and Helena was still lying in the hospital, not knowing that her daughter was being held like a criminal. She had promised Micah, "It will be all right." That was what she told him every night, and tonight, she had broken that promise. Janessa lowered her head onto her knees, her shoulders trembling in waves. She didn't know what to do. For the first time in the 2 years they had spent running, she didn't know what the next step was. At the same time, a few miles from the casino, Micah sat on the worn old sofa in the motel room. 8 o'clock at night. His mother still hadn't come home. Usually she came back at 7. 9 o'clock at night. Still no sign of her. Micah began to worry. 10 o'clock at night. He called his mother's phone number. The ringing went on and on. No one answered. He called again. Still, no answer. 10 times. 20 times. The phone went straight to voicemail. Micah sat in the dark, staring out the window. The streetlights blinked outside. The sounds of traffic grew thinner. The late night slowly settled in. The 7-year-old boy didn't cry. He had forgotten how to cry a long time ago. Since those first nights of running. Since those meals made of nothing but instant noodles. Since the times he watched his mother come home exhausted from a night shift. Tears didn't help anything. He had learned that earlier than most children ever did. He remembered something his mother had once said, on a night when she was helping him with his math homework. The ledger never keeps secrets, Micah. If there's a problem, look at the numbers, look at the time. They'll show you the truth. Where did his mother work? The Ashford Grand Casino, the 30th floor, the finance office. Who could help his mother? Mr. Tristan, the cold man who had still listened to him that night. If his mother wasn't coming home, then something had happened. And if something had happened, he had to do something. Micah stood up. He walked into the tiny bedroom and opened the closet. The oversized white shirt was still hanging there, the same shirt he had worn the first night he went to meet Mr. Ashford. He put it on and buttoned it carefully. The dress pants hemmed up 3 times, the old sneakers with the frayed edges. He looked at himself in the mirror. Still the same thin 7-year-old boy. But in his eyes, there was something different now. Determination. He opened the desk drawer where his mother kept the important things. The silver bracelet with the faded word hope engraved on it lay inside. His mother had meant to bring it with her today, but she had forgotten. He slipped it onto his wrist and felt the cool metal touch his skin, and for the second time in his life, the 7-year-old boy stepped out alone into the dark night. 11 o'clock at night. The Ashford Grand Casino still blazed as bright as day. Micah didn't use the main entrance. He remembered which way Tristan had led him the last time. The side entrance for employees, behind the building, near the parking lot. That door wasn't guarded all the time. He moved through the lot, slipping between expensive cars. His small feet stepped as lightly as a cat's. 2 years of running had taught him how to move without making a sound. 2 years of living in fear had taught him how to avoid other people's eyes. The side door wasn't locked. He pushed it gently and slipped inside. The hallway was deserted. The fluorescent lights shone white overhead. His footsteps sounded softly on the tile floor. He remembered where the staff elevator was. The 30th floor. His mother's office. His heart was beating wildly, but his feet kept moving. The elevator stopped on the 30th floor. He stepped out and looked around. The hallway was dark, with only the green exit light glowing at the far end. Everyone had already gone home. He found his mother's desk. The office door was locked. He tried to push it, but it didn't move. But the vent window above wasn't locked. Micah dragged over a chair, climbed onto the desk, and reached up to push the little vent open. The gap was just wide enough for his thin body to slip through. He squeezed himself in, slid down, and landed lightly on the office floor inside, his mother's desk. The computer was still in sleep mode. He pressed a key, and the screen lit up, full of numbers, spreadsheets, things he didn't understand. But beside the keyboard there was a notebook, his mother's notebook. He recognized the familiar handwriting. He opened it and turned the pages one by one. Work notes, to-do lists, and then one page with the heading, Meeting Schedule. Micah stopped and read carefully. Today's date, 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Meeting with Mr. Ashford, penthouse conference room. He saw his mother's handwritten note about the meeting. Even at 7, Micah knew his mother couldn't be in 2 places at once. If she was with the tall man, she couldn't be at this desk. To his young mind, this was the truth that would save her. Micah turned a few more pages in his mother's notebook, searching for more proof. And he found it, a meeting confirmation sheet, printed on Ashford Group letterhead. The date was clear. Time: 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Location: penthouse conference room, 50th floor. Attendees: Janessa Wells, Dominic Ashford. And beneath that, a familiar signature confirming the validity of the meeting: Tristan Cole. This was proof. If his mother had been in the conference room with Mr. Ashford for those full 2 hours, she couldn't have been sitting at a computer transferring money at the same time. This was a perfect alibi. Micah folded the paper and slipped it into his shirt pocket, pressing it flat against his chest. He had to get it to someone. He had to get it to Mr. Tristan. That man would know what to do. He had just turned around when the office door flew open. A flashlight beam struck him straight in the face, blinding him. Micah threw up a hand to shield his eyes and took a step back. "Who's in here?" A man's voice rang out through the darkness. Then the beam lowered, sweeping over him from head to toe. A figure stepped inside, his face slowly coming into view beneath the fluorescent spill from the hallway. Raymond Cross. He recognized Micah immediately. His eyes widened for the briefest moment, then settled back into something smooth and controlled. The little boy, Miss Wells's son. Micah didn't answer. He stood still, his back pressed against his mother's desk, one hand still covering the pocket where the paper lay hidden. Raymond stepped forward and set the flashlight down on the desk. He smiled, a smile so sugary it was almost grotesque. "What are you doing here at midnight, little man? Lost? Who brought you in?" Micah took another step back until his shoulders hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. "I'm looking for my mother." "Your mother?" Raymond gave a soft laugh, the kind used for a foolish child. Your mother is resting. You should go home. Let me take you outside." Micah looked straight into his eyes. His amber gaze held no fear. "You're lying. My mother is being held." The smile died on Raymond's face. He narrowed his eyes, looking at the boy the way one looks at an irritating insect. "What do you know?" "I know my mother is innocent," Micah said, his voice small but steady. "And I have proof." Silence. Raymond's face changed completely. No more false smile, no more gentle tone, only the cold calculation of a man cornered with nowhere to run. "Give me that paper." He stepped closer, his eyes sharp as knives. Micah shook his head, clutching the pocket so tightly his fingers turned white. "Give it to me now." Raymond lunged and grabbed the boy by the arm. The man's hand clamped hard around the small wrist. Micah flinched from the pain, but he didn't scream. 2 years of running had taught him that screaming was useless. No one came to save you just because you screamed. The only person who could save you was yourself. Raymond yanked him out of the office and dragged him down the dark hallway. His footsteps struck the tile, quick and certain. The boy tried to brace himself, but the strength of a 7-year-old child was no match for a grown man. They passed one door, then another. The corridor stretched on and on. The green exit light flickered at the far end. And then Micah saw it. A door still lit from inside, warm yellow light spilling beneath it. On the plaque outside was the name, Tristan Cole. This was his chance. His only chance. He drew in one deep breath, gathered all the strength in his small chest, and shouted, "Mr. Cole! Mr. Cole! My mother is innocent!" Raymond slapped a hand over his mouth, rough and hard against his lips. But it was too late. The cry had already echoed through the silent hallway. The door to Tristan's office flew open. Tristan Cole stepped out, his sharp eyes sweeping over the scene before him. A man dragging a 7-year-old boy, one hand clamped over the child's mouth, in the middle of the night, in an empty building. "Cross." His voice was cold as ice. "Let him go." Raymond quickly released his hand, trying to keep his face calm. "He broke in here. I caught him in Wells's office. I was about to take him down to security." "Let him go," Tristan repeated, each word clear as an order. Raymond let Micah go. The boy ran at once to Tristan's side, breathing hard, but not crying. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the paper, now wrinkled from how tightly he had held it. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice trembling but firm, "this is my mother's meeting schedule. My mother was with Mr. Ashford from 2 o'clock until 4 o'clock that afternoon. She couldn't have moved the money if she wasn't at the computer. This is proof." Tristan took the paper and looked at it. The date, the time, the location, and his own signature beneath it, confirming the meeting. He remembered at once. The meeting had been real. Janessa had been there for the full 2 hours. He himself had arranged and confirmed it. Tristan lifted his head and looked at Raymond. His eyes were cold as steel, sharp as blades. "Cross," he said slowly. "Stand right there. Don't move." Raymond froze, his face gone pale beneath the fluorescent lights. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. His eyes moved to Micah, then to the paper in Tristan's hand, then down to the floor. He knew. The game was over. Tristan didn't waste any time. He led Micah into his office, shut the door, and left Raymond standing outside, under the watch of 2 security men who had just been summoned. Then he sat down at his computer and logged into the building's security camera system. The day of the fraud. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He ran the footage back and stopped at the penthouse conference room on the 50th floor. Janessa Wells sat across from Dominic Ashford, a pen in her hand, saying something as she took notes. The camera recorded the time clearly in the corner of the screen. 2:15, 2:30, 3 o'clock, 3:30, 10 minutes before 4. For nearly 2 full hours, Janessa never left the conference room. Tristan switched to the transaction logs. The money had been transferred out at 2:20, 2:45, and 3:10. Every single transaction occurred during the very window in which Janessa was sitting in that conference room, in front of the camera, in front of Dominic Ashford himself. She couldn't have done it. She simply couldn't. Tristan pulled up the hidden logs. He had been quietly monitoring the internal network ever since the boy first arrived, and what he found sent a chill through him. The trail didn't lead to the basement at all. It went straight to the 45th floor. Tristan stood up and looked at Micah, who was sitting on the sofa, his eyes wide as he followed every movement the man made. "Come with me," He took the boy up to the penthouse. Raymond was marched behind them by the security men, his face pale as a corpse. The penthouse doors opened. Dominic Ashford sat behind his desk, expressionless as a stone statue. His eyes passed over the group entering the room. Tristan, the little boy Micah, then Raymond, trapped between two guards. Tristan stepped in front of the desk. "Boss, there's a problem with the investigation." Silence. Tristan placed the meeting confirmation sheet on the desk, along with the printout from the camera system. The transactions occurred this afternoon between 2:15 p.m. and 3:50 p.m. As the cameras show, Miss Wells was in the conference room with you the entire time. Someone accessed her terminal while she was away at the meeting. Dominic looked down at the evidence and said nothing. Tristan continued. "I checked deeper. The IP address of the computer that made the transfers wasn't Miss Wells's. Every trail leads back to the computer on the 45th floor. Cross's office." Raymond stepped forward, his voice rushed and strained. "This is fabricated. Someone is trying to frame me. It could have been Miss Wells hacking the system and... Cross." Just one word. Dominic's voice was low and cold, as desert wind after midnight. Raymond fell silent at once. Dominic rose from his chair and walked slowly until he stood directly in front of the man he had trusted for 10 years. He looked Raymond straight in the eye without blinking. "I trusted you for 10 years, Cross. 10 years. You were the man I put in charge of the entire financial heart of this empire." Raymond opened his mouth. "Boss, I swear to you." "Don't swear," Dominic cut in, his voice not loud at all, but sharp as a blade. "What I hate most is a traitor who lies. Don't make yourself into the kind of thing I despise." Silence stretched on. The room itself seemed to stop breathing. "I know you owed money to Victor Morano," Dominic said slowly, each word landing like a hammer driving a nail. "I know you were under pressure, had to move money to pay off the debt. I can understand that. Desperation makes people do foolish things." He tilted his head and looked at Raymond as though he were studying an insect. "But $2,300,000, more than half of it you kept for yourself, not to repay a debt, but out of greed." He paused. "Greed kills people, Cross. You know that." Raymond trembled, his knees seeming ready to give way beneath him. He looked around, searching for some escape, but found only cold faces and a sealed door. Dominic gave a signal to the guards. "Take him away. Deal with him my way." Raymond was dragged from the room, his mouth forming broken pleas that never became words. The door shut behind him. From that night on, no one in Las Vegas ever saw Raymond Cross again. Dominic turned to Tristan. "Bring Miss Wells up here, right now." 10 minutes later, the penthouse door opened again. Janessa stepped inside, worn down with exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, but her back still straight. She looked around the room, not yet understanding what was happening. Then she saw Micah. "My baby." Micah ran to her and threw himself into her arms. "Mom, I saved you." Janessa dropped to her knees and held her son tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't understand. She didn't understand why he was here. She didn't understand what had happened. "What are you doing here? How did you even get in here?" Micah lifted his face, his eyes shining. "I remembered what you taught me. Facts are etched in the figures. I found proof that you didn't do it." Janessa held him even tighter, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She couldn't speak. She could only hold him, as if letting go might mean losing him. Dominic stood beside the desk, looking at the two of them, silent. Tristan stepped close to him, his voice lowered almost to a whisper. "That's the second time that boy has come here, in the middle of the night. Alone." Dominic remained silent, his silence heavy with calculation. He only gave the slightest nod. His eyes came to rest on Micah, the 7-year-old boy clinging to his mother, small inside those oversized clothes, yet brave in a way that felt almost impossible. A child who had dared to walk into a mafia boss's den, who had dared to stand against a traitor, who had dared to do what grown men would never have done. And in that moment, Dominic saw himself from 18 years earlier, a 15-year-old boy running through the night, bloodied and terrified, yet never surrendering. 1 week later, St. Mary Hospital. Afternoon sunlight passed through the white curtain, casting warm streaks of light across the hospital room. Helena lay in bed, her face still pale after surgery, but her eyes were much brighter now. The heart monitor gave off its gentle, steady beep-beep, the sound of life returning. The surgery had been successful. The doctor said she would need several more weeks of rest, but the danger had passed. The hospital bill had been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. Janessa didn't have to ask to know who had done it. She sat beside her mother's bed, her hand lightly holding the older woman's thin fingers. Micah was curled up on the sofa in the corner of the room, fast asleep after too many nights without rest. The room was peaceful in a strange, almost unreal way, as though the storm of the previous week had never happened. A nurse stepped in and tapped gently on the doorframe. "Mrs. Wells? Someone is here to see you." Helena looked up, not even having time to ask who it was before a figure appeared in the doorway. Tall, a black suit cut to perfection, a sharply chiseled face carrying the familiar coldness of men used to holding power in their hands. But the eyes, the gray eyes held something familiar, something Helena couldn't name at first. The man stepped inside and stopped beside her bed. He looked at her for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Do you remember me?" Helena narrowed her eyes, searching her memory. The face was unfamiliar, but the eyes, the steel-gray eyes, and the faint scar running from his temple down to his left cheekbone. The scar rose before her like a buried memory breaking through the surface. A night 18 years earlier, a dark alley in the slums of southern Las Vegas. A knock at her door in the middle of the night. A 15-year-old boy collapsing on her doorstep, blood seeping from the wound in his side, his eyes terrified, but refusing to cry. "Dear God," Helena whispered, her trembling hand rising to cover her mouth. Tears spilled out and ran down her lined cheeks. "The boy from that night? It was you?" Dominic nodded. For the first time since entering the room, his face was no longer cold. Something in his eyes had softened, like ice slowly thawing beneath sunlight. "You saved my life that night," he said, his voice low and quiet. "You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask where I came from. You didn't ask why I was covered in blood. You simply pulled me inside, bandaged my wound, and hid me when people came looking for me." Helena smiled through her tears. I remember it very clearly. A frightened boy, in pain, but refusing to cry. You clenched your teeth the whole time I stitched the wound and never made a sound." Dominic reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and took out something small. The silver bracelet with the faded word hope engraved on it, dimmed by time, but still intact. "You gave me this bracelet." He placed it in her hand. "And you said something to me that I never forgot. 18 years, and I still remember every word." Helena looked at the bracelet, then back at him. She nodded, and together they spoke the words, "Everyone deserves hope, even you." Silence followed, but it was a warm silence, not a heavy one. Dominic sat down in the chair beside her bed. "I looked for you for 18 years. I wanted to come back and repay what I owed, but you vanished, as though you had never existed. No one knew where you had gone." Helena let out a soft sigh. "I moved away right after that night. I was afraid the people chasing you would come to my house. I didn't want to bring more trouble down on us." She paused. "I always wondered whether that boy survived, whether he made it, whether he found his way." "I survived," Dominic said. "I found my way, and I came back to look for you a few months later. But someone else was living in the house by then. They told me you had moved away, but they didn't know where. So you really did come back." Helena tightened her hand around his, her eyes shining with tears. She had never imagined that the boy from that night had remembered, had still wanted to find her after all those years. Janessa stood in the doorway, quietly witnessing everything. Now she understood why Dominic Ashford, the most powerful mafia boss in Las Vegas, had given her a chance. Why he had protected her family. Why he had looked at the silver bracelet that night with the eyes of a man seeing a ghost from his past. It wasn't because of her. It was because her mother, 18 years earlier, had saved a stranger's life without asking for anything in return. Dominic rose to his feet and looked at Helena. "Your family will never have to run again. That's my promise. The people who were chasing your daughter have been dealt with. They won't be coming back." Helena shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I did what I did because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected to be repaid." "I know," Dominic said, his voice growing gentler. "And that's exactly why I owe you. You saved me not because you wanted something in return. You saved me because you believed every life was worth saving." He paused. "You taught me that there are still good people in this world. In the darkest years of my life, that was the one thing that kept me from becoming a monster." Helena held the silver bracelet tightly, and tears slipped down her face again. Dominic bowed his head to her, then turned and walked toward the door. There, he met Janessa. They looked at each other for a long moment without speaking. At last, Janessa broke the silence. "Thank you. For everything you've done for my family." Dominic shook his head. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. Your mother gave me hope when I had nothing left at all. And your son." He glanced toward Micah, sleeping on the sofa. "That boy showed me that courage still exists in this world." He walked away without looking back. Janessa stood there, watching his figure disappear down the hallway. Then she turned back into the room, sat down beside her mother, and for the first time in 2 years, she cried. But they were not tears of suffering. They were tears of relief. 6 months later, Las Vegas still glittered as it always had. Millions of lights flickering in the desert night, the casinos still running 24 hours a day, dreams still being wagered and lost with every passing hour. But for the Wells family, the light of this city now carried an entirely different meaning. Janessa Wells sat in her private office on the 35th floor, where the plaque on the door read Chief Financial Officer, Ashford Hospitality Group. She looked through the glass wall at the city stretched below. The same city where 6 months earlier she had been a fugitive, living in a cheap motel with fear as her constant companion. Now, there was no more running, no more fear. There was only work, respect, and the sense of safety she had once believed was gone forever. Their new apartment stood in a secure neighborhood on the western side of the city. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a balcony overlooking the distant Red Rock Mountains. Each morning, when the sun rose, the light poured into the apartment and warmed the faces that had once gone hard from suffering. Helena had recovered completely. She lived with her daughter and grandson now, no longer having to worry about hospital bills or sleepless nights filled with pain. Every morning, the 3 of them sat together for breakfast around the small table, a thing that would once have felt like an impossible luxury in the days when they had been running. Micah was studying at one of the best private schools in Las Vegas. The boy now wore a neat school uniform, no longer dressed in oversized white shirts or trousers folded up 3 times at the hem, but inside his new backpack, he still kept one thing from the old days. One morning, when Janessa was driving him to school, she saw him open his backpack and check on something. The silver bracelet with the faded word hope engraved on it lay tucked into the smallest compartment. "Why do you still carry it?" Micah looked up, his eyes lighting brightly. "To remember what Grandma taught me." He smiled. "Everyone deserves hope. I don't want to forget that." Janessa bent down and kissed his forehead. "Do you know something, Micah? You are the greatest hope in my life." Dominic Ashford was still the most powerful mafia boss in Las Vegas, still cold, still difficult to approach, still capable of making an entire city tremble at the sound of his name. No one dared look him straight in the eye. No one dared speak to him without permission. But there was something different now, something only the people closest to him knew. Once a month, he came to visit the Wells family's apartment. No bodyguards, no ceremony, just a man knocking on the door on a Sunday afternoon, carrying flowers for Helena and chocolate for Micah. Helena made tea, and Dominic sat across from her. She told stories from the old days. Stories about her youth, about the years she had worked as a nurse, about the patients she had cared for. He listened without interrupting, sometimes nodding, sometimes smiling faintly. Sometimes Micah was there too. The boy wasn't afraid of the mafia boss at all. He challenged him to chess, and somehow he won more often than not. "Mr. Ashford, you lost," Micah cried out with delight, moving his queen into checkmate. Dominic looked down at the chessboard and frowned. "You're cheating." "I'm not cheating," Micah grinned. "I'm just smarter than you are." Helena burst into laughter, a bright, ringing sound that filled the little room. And then, something strange happened. Dominic Ashford, the man all of Las Vegas wouldn't dare look at directly, laughed too. A soft laugh, a rare one, but real. One afternoon after school, Micah ran into the Ashford Grand Casino. By then, he was used to the building, used to the security men nodding to him in greeting, used to the way to the penthouse on the 50th floor. He knocked on the door of Dominic's office, then pushed it open, without waiting for an answer. "Mr. Ashford, I have a present for you." Dominic looked up from the stack of papers on his desk and frowned. "What present?" Micah ran over and held out a sheet of paper. A drawing in colored pencil, scribbled in the unmistakable way of a child, but clearly done with great care. "I drew it for you." In art class today, my teacher told us to draw our family, so I drew mine. You're in it too. Dominic took the drawing and looked at it for a long moment. 4 stick figures. A young woman with brown hair, surely Janessa. An older woman with silver hair, Helena. A smiling little boy, Micah. And a tall man in a black suit, standing a little apart, but still belonging to the picture. Beneath it, in Micah's crooked handwriting, were the words, "My family." Dominic said nothing. He only looked at the drawing, his fingers moving lightly over the colored lines, and for the first time in many years, he truly smiled. Micah's drawing, framed in black oak, now hung with solemn pride on the wall of Dominic Ashford's office. Positioned between million-dollar contracts and awards of power, it was the most valuable thing in the room. The rough, colored pencil lines and the words "New Family" written in crooked handwriting served as a daily reminder that even in the heart of Las Vegas, hope and belonging had finally found their place. Janessa stood by the window of her office on the 35th floor, looking down at Las Vegas, glittering in the light of sunset. This city had once been the place she ran to, the place she thought she would only stop in for a little while before having to run again. Now, it was home. She remembered that first night Micah had walked into the casino. 7 years old, an oversized white shirt, a document case almost half his size, so small before the empire of the most powerful man in the city, and yet never willing to give up. Her son had saved this family. In the most literal sense, she smiled, her eyes shining with pride. At the same time, Dominic stood in the penthouse on the 50th floor, looking down at the glittering city. On his desk, beside the contracts worth millions, lay the silver bracelet with the faded word "Hope" engraved on it, and the drawing from a 7-year-old boy. He had once believed he needed no one. He had once believed loneliness was the price of power. He had once believed his heart had turned to stone on that night 18 years ago. But he had been wrong. 18 years earlier, a stranger had pulled him into her home, bandaged his wound, and given him something more precious than any sum of money: hope. And now, he understood. Hope wasn't weakness. It was the only thing worth living for. Sometimes, light comes from the places you least expect. A 7-year-old boy with an oversized document case. A woman who refuses to give up, even when life has pushed her all the way to the bottom. And a mafia boss who remembers that 18 years ago, someone gave him a chance when no one else even cared enough to look his way. The kindness you plant today may save your life years from now. And family. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, family is the people who choose to stay beside one another when the whole world has turned away. If this story has touched your heart, please press the like button and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our moving stories each day. We would truly love to hear what you felt in the deepest part of your heart. What do you think of this story? What moved you the most? Please share with us in the comments below. Every comment you leave is a source of great encouragement, helping us continue to bring meaningful stories to you. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video. We wish you and your family lasting health, a life filled with joy and peace in every day ahead. And remember, no matter how hard life may become, hope is always there, waiting for you to find it. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.